Let me tell you something that stopped me cold this week. There's a quarterback somewhere out in the mountains right now. No phone, no notifications, no noise from the league, completely disconnected from a conversation that keeps pulling his name into it anyway. And the person dragging his name in, a college kid whose football career just got erased by a gambling addiction. That contrast alone should tell you everything about how sideways this Cleveland Browns quarterback conversation has gotten. But we need to go deeper than the surface, because the layers underneath this story are where the real substance lives, and I want to make sure we actually get there. Let's start with Brandon Sorsby, because if you haven't been following this closely, the situation is genuinely more complicated than the headlines make it sound. Texas Tech cut him. That's done. After absorbing wave after wave of public pressure, the program made the call and walked away. And almost the second that news dropped, Cleveland's name got attached to it. Not because anyone inside that organization made a statement, not because a reporter had sources inside the building pointing that direction, but simply because the Browns have spent so many consecutive seasons being the franchise at the center of every quarterback drama in professional football that their name reflexively shows up in these conversations whether they've earned it or not. It's become a kind of gravity. Chaos orbits Cleveland. Now, before we get into the evaluation side of this, I need to walk you through the supplemental draft mechanics, because I keep seeing takes online from people who clearly don't understand how this process actually works, and it matters enormously for how we should be weighing this entire conversation. The supplemental draft is not a regularly scheduled event. It doesn't happen every spring like clockwork. It's an exception, a pathway specifically designed for players who've lost their college eligibility through circumstances outside the normal timeline, where the league decides it's appropriate to create an entry point for them before the next full draft cycle. Sorsby's situation fits the parameters in theory, because Texas Tech has formally ruled him ineligible this season. So yes, this is currently his only avenue into professional football in the near term. But here's where the story gets thornier than the clickbait is letting on. He hasn't actually applied yet. There's a filing deadline coming up in the next week, and submitting that application isn't even the hardest part. There's active litigation he's currently pursuing, a legal effort to potentially fight his way back onto a college roster. And the NFL will not process his supplemental draft entry while that case is still alive. He has to formally drop it. He has to pick a lane, fight the legal battle, or pursue professional football. Those two roads don't run parallel in this case. They diverge, and he has to stand at the fork and choose. And even after all of that gets sorted, the decision to actually hold a supplemental draft doesn't automatically happen. The commissioner's office has full discretionary authority over whether one occurs at all. There is no guaranteed mechanism here. Everything has to align: the application, the legal withdrawal, and then a league-level decision to proceed before a single team even gets to weigh in. Given the realistic timeline of all those moving parts, you're likely looking at late July at the earliest if this actually happens. That's well after the entire league has already gone through its normal rookie quarterback additions. Cleveland added one, Pittsburgh added one, the Jets added one. The market has been served. These teams aren't sitting on their hands waiting for a supplemental draft to fill a positional need they've already addressed. Now, let me be fair to the football side of this, because I think some of the dismissal of Sorsby as a prospect is happening too casually. If you watched him play in college with fresh eyes, there's talent there that's real and that certain evaluators took seriously. His mobility is legitimate, not just an escape tool, but a genuine weapon that extends plays and creates throwing windows that pocket quarterbacks simply don't have. There's accuracy on the move that shows up consistently on film. Some scouts reportedly had him graded comparably to quarterbacks who actually got selected in this past draft. I'm not going to pretend that piece of the story doesn't exist. But here's where I need to slow down and get precise, because this is the most important part of the conversation, and I think it's getting rushed past in a lot of the takes I'm seeing. A gambling addiction isn't a character flag. It isn't the kind of red flag that shows up in a background check and gets weighed against the size of a player's arm talent on some scout's spreadsheet. It's an addiction, an active one, by every available account. We're talking about something that is still being treated, still being managed, with no real runway yet of sustained recovery to evaluate. That's not a knock on Sorsby as a human being. Addiction is a disease, not a moral failure. But the NFL in the current era is genuinely one of the worst possible environments you could place someone in active recovery from gambling. And that reality has to be faced honestly. Think about what the league looks like right now from the inside. Sportsbooks sponsor broadcast windows. Betting partnerships are built directly into stadium infrastructure. During game broadcasts, odds are displayed on screen in real time. The entire sport has spent the last several years tying its commercial future to the gambling industry in ways that are now structural and permanent. You are asking a man in active recovery from a gambling addiction to spend every Sunday of an entire NFL season walking through an environment specifically engineered around the behavior behavior he's trying to escape. That's not an abstract concern, sitting somewhere on the edges of the risk analysis. That is the job itself. It's not something that can be mitigated by a team's internal wellness protocols or however many psychological evaluations you run in a draft room. The exposure is baked into every single game day, every broadcast, every team sponsor activation. You can't evaluate your way around that reality. You can only decide whether you're willing to accept it. And for Cleveland, a franchise that has already burned through more quarterback drama than any reasonable fan base should ever have to absorb, why would they voluntarily add that variable to a situation that's already complicated enough? The honest answer is they wouldn't. And the reporting out of that building suggests they aren't even close to seriously doing so. Todd Monken said it plainly when someone asked him directly about this. He didn't use the vague, non-committal language coaches sometimes deploy to avoid taking a position publicly. He said flat out that it hadn't crossed his desk, that he wasn't interested, and that the quarterbacks already on this roster are the ones he's invested in. But then he went further, and this is the sentence that really stuck with me. He talked about the danger of evaluating a player purely on athletic ability while disregarding the circumstances that led to the situation they're in. He referenced other sports where gambling violations have ended careers permanently. He called it a slippery slope. That's not a coach being politely evasive. That's a coach who has already made his internal decision and is just choosing not to publicly embarrass a young man who's fighting an addiction while he does it. Andrew Berry gave the standard front office answer. We evaluate every prospect thoroughly. We make organizational decisions responsibly. All the usual language. That's his job and he does it well. But when you place Monken's directness right next to Berry's measured caution and read them together, the actual picture is clear. This is not happening. The Cleveland Browns are not bringing in Brandon Sorsby, and no amount of supplemental draft speculation is going to change that. Now I want to go somewhere that I think a lot of people actively avoid because it requires being honest about something the sports media has been weirdly reluctant to confront directly. There are people out there, a real number of them, who still talk about Sorsby and Shedeur Sanders as if there's some kind of reasonable parallel between them as prospects. Some version of the argument that the league is sleeping on Sorsby the way it supposedly slept on Shedeur. And I need to dismantle that comparison with actual data because it doesn't survive contact with even a casual look at the evidence. Go back to the primetime game, Colorado against Texas Tech. The whole country was watching specifically because of the quarterback narrative on both sidelines. These two players, in the same draft conversation, going head-to-head in a nationally televised environment where the entire purpose was to see what they could do under real pressure. Shedeur's team won. Final score, 34-23. Now here's where I want you to actually sit with the numbers rather than just absorbing them at surface level. Both quarterbacks attempted 30 passes that night. Same volume, same number of chances. Shedeur completed 25 of them. Sorsby completed 16. Shedeur threw for 323 yards. Sorsby threw for 180 yards. Both threw 2 touchdowns. Neither threw an interception. On first read, maybe that sounds closer than it actually was. But let me reframe it. On identical volume, against the same defense, on the same field, Shedeur produced nearly double the passing yards. He completed 9 more passes. His efficiency on every throw was measurably, demonstrably, significantly higher. That's not a gap that gets closed by a single impressive drive or a big play at a key moment. That's a consistent, persistent difference in execution level that played out over 30 reps of data. And this was the single biggest stage either of these players had that entire season. The national showcase game, the night the whole league was watching, the moment designed specifically to separate the top of this quarterback class from the rest of it. Shedeur didn't just edge past him, he outperformed him comprehensively. And here's the thing that truly bothers me about the Sorsby as overlooked gem narrative. The same people pushing it somehow forget that Shedeur Sanders was being discussed as a potential #1 overall pick before this draft cycle even reached its final stretch. He was being mentioned ahead of Cam Ward in certain circles. So if you want to retroactively make the case that Sorsby was undervalued, you have to apply that exact same standard of reevaluation to Shedeur. And when you do, the gap between these two players doesn't shrink, it expands. Because Shedeur was already at the top of the conversation, and Sorsby was below him, and the head-to-head data confirms exactly that order. So when I hear people trying to manufacture some kind of equivalency between these two quarterbacks, or worse, suggesting that Cleveland should be looking outside their building for a solution at a position they've already addressed, I genuinely don't know what game they watched. And I don't know which version of the Browns they think they're analyzing. Because what's actually happening inside that facility right now is the story. Not Sorsby, not the supplemental draft, not any of the noise that's been orbiting this franchise from the outside. The real story is a quarterback competition that, from everything being reported out of Cleveland, is exactly where it should be. There's genuine competition. Real reps, real evaluation under real pressure. The coaching staff came into this offseason with specific, concrete development benchmarks for Shedeur. footwork refinement, quicker ball release, physical conditioning brought to a professional standard. And by every account coming out of organized team activities, he has met every single one of those markers. That matters more than most people are giving it credit for, because new coaching staffs run on trust, and trust gets built exactly this way. A young player being told precisely what's expected of him, and then going out and doing it without being asked twice. There's also something deeper happening here from a roster construction perspective that I think deserves more attention than it's getting. Cleveland made a major move this offseason. They traded one of the most dominant defensive players in franchise history. That's not a decision you make to stay the same. That's a declaration that the organizational timeline is being reset, that the rebuild has a direction, and that the people in charge of that direction are betting on young players carrying this team into its next competitive window. If that's genuinely the framework, and every piece of evidence suggests it is, then putting a young quarterback on a rookie contract at the center of it makes complete structural sense. 2 additional first-round picks worth of flexibility to build the supporting cast around him. A developmental timeline that aligns with the rest of the roster's reset. Financial room to add pieces instead of being locked into a contract that handcuffs every other roster decision. Compare that to any realistic scenario involving a veteran quarterback who has not played winning football in years, and the math isn't particularly close. The logic points in one direction. The only real question is whether the competition inside the building produces a clear answer before training camp forces one. And the fact that nobody in Cleveland's front office is expressing urgency about the lack of a named starter tells you everything. Because the benchmark for genuine concern isn't the absence of a decision. The benchmark is whether either player looks so far out of his depth that the decision gets made for you. And that's not what's happening. Both quarterbacks are performing. Both are pushing each other. That's the outcome you actually want when you're rebuilding from the ground up at the most important position on the field. So while the internet keeps trying to write a Cleveland Sorsby connection into existence, the actual quarterback story happening inside that building has nothing to do with him. The story is about a young player who spent his entire offseason doing precisely what was asked of him, who earned trust from a coaching staff that didn't know him, who put himself in legitimate position to walk into the most important training camp of his career as a genuine competitor for the starting job. And the only thing he's actually doing with his time right now is what any smart competitor does before the real work begins: recharging, clearing his head, getting away from the noise before it gets loud again. That's the story. The supplemental draft speculation, the Sorsby comparisons, the manufactured Cleveland connections, that's all noise chasing a headline that was never really there. And the sooner we stop treating it as substance, the sooner we can actually focus on what's real.